The media literacy is one of the competencies that we, and I personally thought, is important. Thinking that because we are so media-centered, and our culture is what I and many other scholars we call high-tech culture, high-tech. I don't say civilization, I say culture. Because culture changes, but civilization is something more deep, long-term. It doesn't change over technological changes so quick. But media literacy, and is that the best term? And what then about the other concepts? What is media and so forth? I deliberately use the civilization. It's so broad. Many other scholars ignore, saying that it cannot be studied in the context of media and in the context of literacies because it's too broad. My claim is that that's wrong. The world, the globalism is exactly challenging our common sense wisdoms about civilizations, including the Western civilization that I'm trying to elaborate. The issue is there anything that challenges Western civilizations, or or is it, as I explained last week, that there was a belief that the liberal democracy extends all over the world and all cultures, all civilizations follow the same pattern. And people who say who are a little bit realists saying that there's no alternative. We are in a global high-tech culture. They say that this is only romanticism, idealism, and propaganda to believe that there will be other civilizations. And I challenge this view. But let me come to this in a second. But if you read, because again it's a good form that, why don't you read book? Why do you, when you can download it, you can have it in a computer? How many of you has read books, or let's say 100 pages from a computer? Or do you want to, you have? You are a different generation than me. I get tired after a few pages. I want to underline, I want to go back and forth physically. But it's a behavior. It could be equally quick with the computer because you are used to it. But in the beginning of this publication, I quoted here Socrates and his discussion with Plato, because this issue of technology, literacy, and wisdom is not new. It's not only the internet. Here it was a debate in the ancient Greece and Egypt when art of writing was developed, and the debate with Socrates had, and I have here quotations from this debate or discussion, that the worry was, and Socrates was worried about, that if we move from spoken rhetorics, spoken oral communication to written, we write texts, we break our memory. Because memory in the old thinking was built on certain communication rhythm, communication behavior, tales, poets, soothsayers, all kind of communicative elements that were needed to maintain and develop memory. Once you separate message from the context, you may liberate it, but it also is disconnected. And people can superficially learn things, but they don't reach wisdom. So the debate on what is wisdom has been there always and still is. And what is even more and is interesting, that when we discuss about the new technology like search engines, Google and all these things, with internet. What things have we changed? We have changed, for example, the way of memorizing things. Earlier, even in education and in my childhood, we learned by heart poems, music, geography, and many things. That was a method of learning and keeping in memory. Now we don't memorize things. We search by keywords or search engines. It is good in a sense, but at the same time, what about situations that you don't have this search engine available, or whatever reliability problem there might be? We do not know for sure what have we lost and what have we gained. Another example would be mathematics. You can go to digital tools anytime, do calculations. You don't even know how to do the old type of calculation by heart or by a notebook or something, which we learned and my generation learned, and I even know today. So things change, the technology changes. This I discuss with you in a minute when I try to explain what is the meaning of media, what is the meaning of communication, before we go to digital media, digital communication. What is media, what is communication, and why do we use and should we use these words, or are they already obsolete in the rapid development of technology? That should we be talking about simply 21st century skills and competencies, and what is the difference between skill and competence, and what is actually literacy. But first about this humanism. What is the in today's world? Is there any place for humanism? And if so, what would it be? And how would it be reflecting in the communication and media? And what should we analyze? My starting point for this small publication, but also for my work in last 10 years, was very simple. That after the Second World War, when UNESCO was created, I'll speak more about UNESCO next week, next Thursday, during the course as much as needed. But UNESCO was a kind of creation of Western idealism or Western philosophy in education, mainly British, French, actually mainly British American philosophy, not so much French. France was active in film industry and culture, but education and political communication was British American. The whole constitution of UNESCO was created, and you know by whom? Because today United States is again quitting out of UNESCO. It did it once before, but they don't want to stay at UNESCO because they think UNESCO is not reflecting properly Western values, not properly Israel particularly, but then United States interests. So this debate on whether United States will be part of UNESCO or not, while China and Russia are actively supporting UNESCO constitution, and none of them were, not China nor Russia were in the beginning creating UNESCO. China was, in a way that it was the Republic of China, Taiwan, and even that was not active. So the People's Republic of China, because it was created only in 1949, it became later. But today, China is one of the main financiers, funding sources of UNESCO, and one of the main active promoters of cultural exchange between countries. And China believes strongly in educational, cultural cooperation and invests a lot of money. Russia was, at that time, Soviet Union, was not so interested in UNESCO during Stalin period, and in the beginning, Soviet Union was of the opinion that United Nations Economic and Social Council covers the area of human educational, cultural cooperation. So they were not so convinced about UNESCO as Western powers. But the constitution of UNESCO was written, surprise, surprise, it was drafted and written by an American poet, Archibald MacLeish. He was a poet and librarian of the United States, and then the British Prime Minister Clement Attlee was the second main author of the Constitution. And just to put it briefly, we can discuss in detail, but the Constitution begins, or the message, UNESCO's overall brand is, since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that peace has to be built. So it was an idealistic belief that building peace in the minds of men through education, culture, communication, science, that is that is the objective. I take it for granted. This is interesting also for that reason that when Archibald MacLeish was later asked, not long ago, 20 years, 30 years ago, I don't remember, what about peace education and what about peace program in UNESCO? And he said very strongly that after all, this is important because peace with the government decisions is not the lasting peace. It is only an interval between wars. Governments make an agreement of a treaty after one war, preparing a second war, and that is what they call peace. But peace, in the real sense, lasting form of life requires peace education, and that is positive and not negative. So peace and peace education are positive things, while war and conflicts are negative things, that they are for different purposes. So he was strongly saying that peace education should be part of UNESCO thing. Now, we have seen the Cold War period, and I'm coming in my own publication to this peace issue also, but why did I choose the humanism? Because after the second, or even during the Second World War, because the negotiations with the Allied powers started already in 1942. What then after the war with education? And we have people from Germany here. You know that the attitude of Americans, British, French was very negative towards the effective Nazi German education. They wanted to destroy the old educational system, as also the media, completely. And this is a debated thing in Germany. I don't know if I'm right, but it's a debated thing that did Germany change voluntarily, or was it forced to change education from outside? We don't need to take a position, but Germany anyway changed the education system very radically after the war. And the thing is that the Allied powers thought, particularly British Americans, that how do they organize international global education after this devastating, destructive, terrible war? And UNESCO did not come out of the heaven. There was already, before the Second World War, was a League of Nations. League of Nations after the First World War, again a creation of Americans. And the Americans did not join that. They created the institution, but they didn't join it because it was not on the expectations of American isolationism and the idealistic belief. So United States is always a big player in this global education communication field. But in the League of Nations, there was a special committee which was called Intellectual Cooperation, Committee for Intellectual Cooperation. So the philosophy has been that already from the League of Nations that intellectual cooperation is needed for peace. It implied very many famous science. I think even Einstein was member of this. Anyway, big names were part of the. You can Google and find out Intellectual Cooperation Committee. You find out what important actors, writers, scientists, scholars were already involved in building international cooperation in the field of education and science and communication. But at that time, it was almost exclusively European-American activity. So the intellectual cooperation did not include so-called third world or so-called developing world at all, not visibly anywhere. It dealt with many issues. I have written a lot of it myself. We can discuss if you want, but basically their interest was, from communication point of view, how to prohibit, for example, hostile radio propaganda, or how to eliminate enemy images from textbooks, history books. Can you imagine that there was a declaration international declaration of looking critically to type of textbooks different countries are using, but only a few countries signed that. I think it was 21 countries signed, and most of them were small countries with no importance, because the big countries all had an excuse. They don't want international organization to interfere into the internal affairs of education and particular history books. France did not want to interfere into the freedom of teachers. UK, England didn't want to limit the freedom of I didn't want to interfere to the local authorities who had the power to decide what kind of textbooks. And the United States also, even though it was not actively a member, but they had their view of nobody from outside could limit the freedom. Germany did not care about this declaration, and my understanding was that Russia was quite neutral, negative as well. Don't know for sure because it can be looked, but none of the big countries approved, only small ones. So we had a failure in the first efforts to build something. Then came the war, and we know the situation with intellectuals. Wherever they came from, what happened to the philosophical, cultural leaders in different countries, in totalitarian countries, and the UNESCO constitution was drafted. As after the war, the first Director General was Julian Huxley, and he was the brother of Aldous Huxley, The Brave New World. You know the book. So it's a famous family. But Julian Huxley and his understanding, because destructive war, like the Second World War, also destroys intellectual imagination, positive peace thinking. It destroys ideals. It destroys not only the physical world, but also the mental world. So it was no hope. There was atomic bomb was used, nuclear weapons. imagine what would follow if we really had a major war again, and what kind of destruction it will definitely bring around. What will happen to humanity if it still exists? I'm not an alarmist. I don't want to exaggerate, but it was a real danger after the World War, that what will happen to this cooperation, because suddenly, even though United Nations was also a creation of Western powers and the Soviet Union, it was not in the constitution, it was not reflected. What do the Indians, what do the Chinese, the people, what do the South Africans, Brazilians, what do they want? Because many of these countries were under colonial control over the victory powers, and so United Nations Constitution was also reflecting still the colonial world order. We are now in a situation that now we have a new order coming. Unfortunately, it may not be exactly the one that people expect and want, and we do not know if somebody accepts it, a peaceful transfer. Maybe somebody wants to have a conflict. Who is the one who wants to have a conflict in either to preserve or build a new power? This is a big debate. But I'm coming back to the creation of UNESCO and the new humanism. The higher humanity is a concept from Julian Huxley. And at that time, the natural sciences belief was still strong. Progress was very much also reflected in art and in sciences through the mechanistic, material sciences, biology. And as Julian Huxley he wrote very clearly that evolution in a way has come to not to an end entirely, but the only thing that still develops and evolves is human species. So the human beings have to take responsibility for developing their mental, whatever spiritual abilities or mental map to correspond to the global human needs. At that time, humanism was very much equal to materialism. The Western humanistic movement was very atheistic, non-religious, materialistic, which, by the way, is not the situation today. There are many types of humanistic movements, but at that time it was strongly, and still today is a strong stream of Western humanistic movement. Forget religions, faith systems, spiritual, maybe spiritual faith, but you have to take them as material world. It's a kind of belief issue even today, and it's one of the contradictions. But what happened? Huxley, when he was appointed 1946. After 2 years, he resigned. He resigned because the world was not going to the direction that Huxley wanted it to go or expected it to go after the devastating war. It was expected that people and nations find a new way of cooperation. But Cold War emerged. 1948, and after that, Western powers, Soviet Union, the East-West division broke. It was always after the Russian Revolution, 1917, it was always a conflict between communism and capitalism, if you want. But it was not. It was more ideological in the 20s and at that time, because fascism also emerged. But after the Second World War, it was more more political ideology, and Huxley was so disappointed that he resigned. And after that, UNESCO has not been very strong in anything in that level, because the Cold War divided also UNESCO activity till these years of 1990s, when the Cold War was finally, if not over, at least it was temporarily over. We don't know where we are going now, but it was temporarily over, and there was a new beginning. The type of things last week I explained, the Fukuyama, Huntington theories and so forth, so new beginning. My interest to this thinking emerged. I was lecturing with the Indian professor Sitaram. We had common seminars, not only in Finland, but also in Rochester and Southern Illinois universities in the United States, about the higher humanity. Unfortunately, my colleague passed away. He died already 12, 15 years ago, and our work did not mature further. But I took the concept New Humanism from UNESCO new Director General Irina Bokova, who was appointed 2010, and her term ends now this week. She has been 2 periods. She's Bulgarian, a French Minister of Culture, Audrey, forgot the name. She will be appointed now this week. There will be a change in the orientation. What change, I don't know, but there's a situation also that the United States and Israel are withdrawing from the organization, so it's a new moment. But Irina Bokova, she emphasized that the credo of UNESCO will be new humanism. And that's why I took the concept, trying to find what could it be in our approach. Anyway, it says here, and this is from her texts, which we quoted in the book, that new sense of respect to multiplicity and cultural diversity, support for media development with goal of consolidating the new culture of peace. Of course, these are words, but still it's better to have the words as goals than not. So I admire greatly her still, and she was even candidate for the Secretary General of United Nations, but she failed. And my work, my modest work, reflects her spirit. She appointed me to the governing board of the Technology Institute. It began with the Chinese philosophy last week, and this is a summary of a Chinese philosopher, Honorary President Liu Ji. What do they understand with humanism? Confucianists, Mohists, Taoists, Buddhists. And the conclusion was, as society evolves at high speed, the core values of Chinese civilization can be considered a blueprint for the development of universal harmony. That's a new humanism. Anyway, that is one Chinese approach. Personally, I cannot speak to you what Mohists really are, what Taoists, Buddhists. I can read, but we know all from the Western world. We know the kind of peace activists and all kind of citizen movements, whatever. But this is an example of the articles that you can elaborate. And now I would still like to go to my own work. This is a kind of introduction to, I put here, not Varis, that I would be a great author. It is Jose Manuel Perez Tornero and myself, we did together. But I'm responsible for what I'm saying now. And let me explain you how I understood and understand new humanism or humanistic awareness today. But my approach is European, not so much American, because I see the history more as a European, from European perspective, because of my own background. And the old humanism is the type of Renaissance, the type that the Europeans in the 15th, 16th century, 17th century developed art, science, culture, all kind of societal beauties and culture. And the new humanism is something, I don't know if it, but something I contrast with the old. So what was characteristic for us 500 years ago that human beings became superior of theology. Now this is interesting. That what do I mean by theology? Do I mean church, Catholic Church, Protestant, basically Catholic Church, or do I mean theologians, people? We probably meant church, but now today I'm also thinking maybe it's also that there's no priests that are above free science, free inquiry of knowledge. And I want to remind that I am not an atheist. So my message is not that, I'm not even agnostic. I'm in faith myself. So it's not to say that people who believe are wrong. I don't want. But what we had in Europe was that church and priests were not controlling free inquiry of knowledge. Today, I think that we are too much, I'm very strong on this, we are too much technology push. We believe that technology leads the way to better life. And if there are problems created by technology, be it automobiles, airplanes, or be it computer, technology also solves the problem. So people who believe in technology, they think that technology can be good, can be bad, but technology itself solves the problems. I do not want to be technology. I'm very happy to teach and promote technological literacies and all kind of computer. But I think that we should be not, this is an issue you have to answer. Do you really want that smart intelligence machines take your decisions? You don't need to think or make any decisions. Let the smart engines, robots, and all kind of intelligence networks solve your problems. Even choose your company. Choose what kind of love you want to have. So I'm just asking provocatively, what is the place of technology in this high-tech culture of ours? And because it's so strong, I want to promote literacies that we also master the use of technology. Coming back to that. The old humanism was directed, included the critical approach to classic texts. And more than that, even in the church power, the Bible, the holy book of the church, it was also studied by free people, individual people. Thanks to the technology of printing press and thanks to the Reformation and kind of Luther and others who insisted that not only the selected priests can read the holy books, but also people themselves can. Anyway, critical text approach to everything, be it philosophy, be it astronomy, and then the discovery of astronomical new look at the universe, Copernicus, Kepler, Galilei, all of this. I think also that we need in humanism, we need critical approach to technology. It's nice, it can be, but it has to have a place in our life. What place? Here we come to very crucial issues that we are now debating. For example, later, next week, the week after, I will speak with you about fake news, all kind of alternative media, false news and things. It's the communication media. Why do people distrust the major media, mainstream media? What is mainstream media? So we have to be able to also critically look, is everything you find in internet, is that somehow more true than some other means of getting knowledge? And thirdly, the old humanism was a development of self, identity of individual human being, not a collective slave, or not, but a free human being. And the discovery in thinking that after all it is a identity of self, yourself is important, and you have liberate yourself and grow in that liberated spirit. Now in the new humanism, because I'm very strong on this autonomy over global communication. If we don't even have we don't have even our own language anymore used. We are using English language here. Most of the world media is even though it is provided with minority languages, it's provided with certain manipulative, propagandistic interest. Where is the authentic use of the indigenous media? But my claim is that whatever we have open to international global communication, we also want to struggle for autonomy, that at least we control messages and news and information that we are receiving and we are exchanging in the world. This is a big issue in internet, because now it has become obvious that after all, even the most so-called free media are being used for espionage, intelligence, spying, hatred, and so forth. And what should the emerging civilizations do? Should they adopt the dominant technology and media, or should they build their own? I'm strongly advocating, as a small country or small nation, representative autonomy. By the way, when the World Bank report is there, and I was thinking myself today when I was listening to the opening launching of the report, that World Bank and even the European Union is still counting and measuring the world on the basis of individual states. They compare what is the density of internet use in Denmark, in Finland, in Luxembourg, in Tanzania, in China. This nation-state concept, my understanding, it belongs to the past. Today we have civil society, citizenship, and it is global, and it is more so that the cultures, and I would call civilizations, are more interesting. For example, why do we look at the Arabic world as independent nation states when suddenly they are emerging, fusing, disappearing, conflicting? They were artificial creations by foreign powers. Everybody knows it. Why don't we look at this cultural, civilizational unit? That's what the terrorists wanted to do. I'm not defending the terrorists, but there was a point of looking at the whole region from a different perspective. Nation states is only one indicator, but it seems to be the indicator so easily used by the governments. And now they compare. Look at Estonia. Estonia is leading in digitalization of the world, and then they say, what about Brazil? Well, Estonia is like a suburb of Sao Paulo. Sao Paulo is 10 times more bigger, and the whole complexity of the society, not only the history, but the complexity is such that the comparison is misleading in all respects. because you can have small islands here, small islands there, that give interesting results, but they are not a solution to a global global citizenship education. I come back to the global citizenship in a separate lecture a little bit later, but here is a Catalonia good example. What they want to have autonomy about whatever they are, part of Europe or Spain or whatever, but they want to have their own language respected and own habits, music, culture properly maintained and reflected in their, for example, in the media. Then fourthly, this old humanism was New World. Again, European invention. When our countries, after the industrialization, and they run into a population growth problem, our countries, I mean Europe, England, others, where to go? The people, agricultural production was not growing enough, population grew. What to do? And the Malthus theory of conflict between population growth and the economic and nutrition and food production do not correspond. They could be temporarily solved that Europeans conquered other worlds. They traveled and moved North America, Asia, not so much Africa. Africa was used for raw materials, but Africans were moved to work for the New World. And in fact, it was not only North America. You know that there were as many slaves from Africa to Brazil as there was to North America. Maybe you don't know how big slave traffic was from Africa to South America, Brazil particularly. That's why the music at Gilberto Gil was here presenting last week from the Bahia region is reflecting the African influence to Brazil. But today, we cannot, in the new humanism, there's a concept of diversity. I think it's a good concept. It's not spoiled by politicians yet. It reflects that, after all, we are different. We can live in a world, and now we come to the issue, is it possible to have a dialogue? Or is it something, a clash, conflict that in between the cultures? And is the civilizational approach correct one? And furthermore, when old humanism, the people were cosmopolitan, they could particularly in Europe, they could move from one city, because the states were not yet necessarily the same, say Italy, from city-state to another city-state. But now the question is that if we have universal rights, and this question universal is a controversial thing. Are there such things as universal rights? We believe that there are. Western world believe that there are universal rights, like human rights. But if there are universal rights, there must be also universal responsibilities. And whose responsibilities are we now talking in the new humanism? Is it a corporate responsibility, or is it individual responsibility, or what? If you ask people who are in technology, they might have one answer. But even they could say that it's unpredictable, and technology has never developed the way that has been planned in advance. And even less now, when large part of the technology is being promoted by military interests, like internet. In the beginning, internet was ARPANET, secret military intelligence radar before, all kinds of supersonic. We don't even know what kind of weaponry is in the process of being developed, and how the intelligence. What I'm mostly worried about is the intelligence, loss of privacy, and the development of intelligence networks. And then it combined and connected. For example, a very simple example. The Facebook, where I'm a very passive user. You can find me there. I have some notes, but it's collecting and doing and finding almost everything for my life better than I do. How easy it is to program little bit more to find even more for anybody who is of any importance, a person, machine. Because in financing, they are already doing the business, financial transactions globally are done within not only seconds, much smaller period of time by machines. Nobody even knows what transactions is there by the machines being done and what consequences it has. Yesterday was some big news in Finland and elsewhere in England. Not only the follow-up, the Paradise Papers, after the Panama Papers. Suddenly there's a revelation of not secret but hidden documents. 1 million, I don't remember how many pages, 12 million pages. That how the so-called rich or wealthy people, how they really manipulate the world financing, ownership, money transfer, and everything. So there's so much behind. Should we develop the transparency, which is a movement, or can we trust anything? So my problem is that if you don't trust anything, what will be democracy? Because then you come to the situation that, okay, we have elections, we have media, but look at the media, it's financed and owned by the same circles that already control the world. There are elections, but the elections are very superficially organized, manipulated anyway. So what happens to it can lead to a kind of dictatorial, authoritarian, whatever rule as has happened before. I'm not saying this is happening, but the machines don't help in this. It must be humans. And that's why I'm coming to my concept of media literacy, or literacies in general. That we have, and I use the word, and Unesco has been using the word empower. Empowerment. So if we raise the awareness and people, students and active people about the situation, and then we empower people to know what is happening and possibly use to their own interest, what kind of society will it be? And how does it work in a world which is not, unlike Montesquieu S Democracy? You remember the French philosopher Montesquieu. Division of power, legislative, executive, and juridical power. Legislative parliament, juridical court, and then executive government, and then free press. That was possible to develop this theory of Western democracy at the time in Europe and later in America, when the societies were relatively small. And there were no global corporations, because the corporations were within the national jurisdiction. So the government in power could control what businesses they had, activities in the country. Legislation was possible to pass laws that applied to everybody active, and the court was somehow also operative. But it was within a certain geographically defined region. Now European Union was created a kind of new kind of alternative to the past sovereign national state system. We know European Union is not exactly what it was expected to be, and we have a big debate what it will and should be. But it is not the same situation. It is not because the companies and the money doesn't even get limited to Europe. It's global. They escape to anywhere, and they have their own paradises and their own controls. Now if the technology is somehow assisting this development and not people's interests, it may be that there will be a reaction like in the 19th century labor movement in England and elsewhere, when the workers realized that the machines were taking their jobs. They started to break the machines. So that looks very, it was very destructive, but it looks also very anti-intellectual. Of course it was anti-intellectual, but it was from the interests of the people who lost their jobs. And what is happening now in the United States, for example, that the big intelligent machines and things have led to a situation that production is not limited to the United States territory. They have spread all over the corporations, and they use the global environment, but people are not global. I'm not answering your question directly, but I'm saying that technology is always two-faced. It can promote something, it can prevent something else. And if I come back to, I had a small lecture here in Helsinki with some activists or people, or young people who told me that, what do I think about peace tech? Peace tech. I had never heard about it. Then I learned, okay, it is something that United States Peace Institute is promoting, and some Microsoft are promoting. They want to have a system that when the new technology is promoting, for example, military sales and military, they would need to put certain share of their profits into peace-related activities, like in the green in the green industry of that say oil industry, that it has to also while producing oil, it also has to invest to environmental things. I have no opinion on this. It was a new thing to me. But these people believe that when technology is creating or contributing, I don't want to say it creates conflicts, but it's contributing to violent conflicts, it should be contributing to peaceful solutions. That's one of the beliefs. But here I have the summary of a type of post-humanistic thinking. And if you look at the down here, there are different streams of thought. Some is artificial intelligence will take over humans altogether, that humans are not needed at all. It could be, we could be self-destructive, collective suicide. Is that the solution? Not in my humanistic approach, definitely not. I don't think, but I come now to a theological issue. I'm not raising humanistic above God. That's a difference, because the first division we have to make is human being a center of everything, or do we believe in God? Now, if you don't believe in God, it's okay. But if you go to an Islamic world, or maybe even in China or India, they have different God. Because the moral base, the civilizational base, comes from something. Now Russia, and this is interesting to know, what is the Orthodox reaction? Politically, Russia is using this value-free, or let's say value-less Western criticism, that they want to say that you don't even defend Christianity. But they do have Orthodox Church, which is very close to the government, thinking, and it's a kind of ideological, value-based, not conflict but competition somehow. It's an interesting situation. We should be talking about what is communication, because I am in a communication study, so communication is very much community. Those who speak Latin, comunicare, comunicare, in Spanish and in Italian and French, and so it means that we share, we build a communion with different means of communication, and not only between humans, but in the Latin tradition also between God and humans. So communication is the deepest possible form of human interaction. Of course, animals communicate, plants also communicate, and so forth. We can have many different dimensions. But then comes the question of media, and this is something that we take it for granted, that the technology that is being used to communicate mediates. We have separated from the process as its own area. My chair, university chair, was media education. First it was communication education, but in the English language, I don't know in Namibia, but in America, communication, education is rhetoric, speech communication. So but the media is that Walter Ong was one of the great classic philosopher speakers of communication media theories. He was working in St. Louis University. I think I met him. I'm just trying to memorize myself because it was a long time ago. But anyway, I was there, and the old man over 90 came to meet me because I came from Finland, and he wanted to remember how was Finland in 1962 when he was in Finland. Anyway, he was a very impressive person who for the first time he realized that if we move from one media, written media, spoken media, written media, to radio and television, many things change. As he says, I'm quoting from him, that what changes is not only moving information, but the new media that is being introduced is making possible thought processes inconceivable before. And this I was very much interested thinking about when I read this publications, that this was very cleverly done, that we changed our brain, the way our thought processes. And you who have now been introduced to the digital internet, immediate, constant, global media, again, there must be a cultural big process of change in your thinking. For example, in organizing the memory, but many other things too. But what he said, that his classic book was this Orality and the Literacy, and the concept was secondary orality. So the belief at that time in the 80s, 70s, 80s was that when the domination of newspapers, books, and publishing, printing industry was so strong, so mobile, so dominating, he believed, okay, now that the radio, television comes so as an alternative media, that they will break the monopoly of the big newspaper industries. And he developed the concept secondary orality, believing that we really come back to different, in the advanced high-tech cultures of the West, back to the oral communication model. He was wrong, not in this concept. We really came back to the more orality, as you know, the today's electronic media. It's not rhetoric. It's careless, colorless. It could be many colored, but the English language that is being spread all over is bad English. So it must be very much painful for English speakers to adjust to lower level of language. Anybody whose language is spoken badly suffers if it's not spoken well. I believe it's pain for the French to accept. But the point is that he believed that now that the electronic media is replacing the monopolies, we will get rid of the monopolistic nature of press media. But he was wrong. The electronic media created its own monopolies. In America, ABC, CBS, NBC, we all reflect to some extent all of this still. For example, if you listen to the telephone communication, telephone, which is not only the mobile, but the traditional telephone, how many times people, how slowly they repeated the behavior of face-to-face chatting. You talk long, and you tell the same thing several times, while a good, sophisticated way of communicating by the telephone is think first before you even phone, unless you want us to have a contact. But if you want to have a message or something, think first and condense your message to clear something. But this is still, we are still not, unfortunately, the new Twitter type of things where you are limited to a few sentences. You have to condense, but then you have all kinds of nonsense going all the time. But the redundancy belongs to this type of behavior, that because you can never be sure if you hear correctly or the message goes through, you repeat, and you do it many times. And basically, it's conservative because things have to be memorized. There's no way of checking. And this was, going back to my own work, to the Socrates-Plato debate about what is good communication. Is it writing or is it oral? That it should be. But writing definitely reconstructs consciousness, and the way our societies in Europe, America, made such a progress was very much due to the effective use of written text. You could store particularly scientific, scholarly text and also artistic, human, historical texts in a condensed form, keep them served. You didn't need to go around and speak the same things. Now with the electronic media, situation is again, who reads book anyway? And it's not enough that you have seen in some quotation the book, but you don't have time to read. And when I read the World Bank report, for example, when they are now trying to find an answer that what is the impact or what is the effect of learning, they want to measure and study. You come to a course, you take some practical skill course or whatever philosophical, theoretical course, then you measure what did you learn. But from communication scholar like me, it's not the only correct question. We come to a very crucial issue. You have to ask the right questions, because a question already implies the answer. This is old wisdom. Raising the question is the needed skill. If you ask the right question, the answer already almost is there. For example, you may now go after this session, you may go out to the class, there's somebody having a questionnaire asking you structured or non-structured questions. What did you learn? Did you learn this? Did he say what is, how did he define communication? You ask X or C or whatever. Then they measure, okay, you learned this much. It may be learning something, but learning, as in communication, the impact is also long-term. It may take many years before you understand what I wanted to say. But it still is somewhere deep in your mind. Okay, the professor was mentioning, I didn't quite understand, but he mentioned something of this. And this is very obvious, even in mathematics. I have a degree also in statistics. I can do the technical, statistical, mathematical calculations very easily, quickly. But it takes tens of years for me even to understand what is it about, or multiple variable analysis. So in any, particularly in philosophy, in education, it may take long time before you can say what was really the effect, and maybe it comes only in the crucial moments in your own life that the relevance is obvious. The issue is, are we living a global high-tech culture? And if so, what does it mean? I mean, because we are using certain type of technology. The only alternative so far is the Chinese technology, so far. Russians have limited, they have their own Facebook. system and a search engine, sure. But globally, and is it bringing with it secretly disguised also behavior, values, like electricity did? No one is from Ireland here, no? From Ireland, Eire. Ireland became English, I think, speaking, very interesting way in the 19th century when they had their own language, Gaelic language, dominant language, but through electricity and engineering it was electricized by the British, and the English was brought to the country, and the original language disappeared. It now 6, 7, 8% speak only Gaelic language, but it was 70% 200 years ago. So language can change. What values changed, if any? We can ask: was it a benefit for the Irish to have English and win the Eurovision Song Contests, or was it a disadvantage because they lost their own language? And I understand that this is also the concerns of Catalonians and Galicians and Basque, that they are afraid that their own language is losing. This was the case if you are now in Finland. When you are now in Finland, when you are in Finland to study, even if you are interested, that how was this language developed and actually became a civilized language only 200 years ago, so late, quite young, and now we are using it, even though we are now losing it because it's not. We are becoming. I put it this way, that we have to accept the global world, that we have to communicate somehow. But exactly because of that, I do not want. I try to avoid, in my speaking, having not too much accent of Native American, Native British, English, Indian. My English is Finnish English. Good to be so clear as possible, but not losing my own frame of reference and behavior more than is needed to communicate.